A millionaire, disguised as a janitor, walks into a struggling community and encounters a remarkable woman who changes everything. But what's her secret? And how does their unlikely bond unravel a web of deception and bring justice to light? Stay tuned to uncover the twists, the turns, and the emotional journey that left everyone speechless. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is a story you won't want to miss. The air in the dimly lit lawyer's office was heavy with anticipation, an unspoken tension hanging between the four occupants. Donovan Jacobs, a distinguished attorney in his late 50s with graying temples and a voice smooth as silk, adjusted his glasses as he unfolded the parchment-like document before him. Sitting directly across the oak table was Christopher Steele, a man dressed in worn jeans and a plaid shirt, his hands clasped tightly together. His expression was one of quiet restraint, yet his piercing blue eyes betrayed a storm of emotions brewing beneath the surface. Next to him, Evelyn Steele, his younger sister, shifted uneasily in her chair. Evelyn's eyes darted from the lawyer to her brother, her unease evident in the way she clutched her purse. She was the antithesis of Christopher, soft-spoken, cautious, and often torn between loyalty and her own aspirations. Across from them sat William "Billy" Steele III, their late father's eldest son and a man of ambition. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, his presence radiated a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming the armrest, a faint smirk curling on his lips. Donovan cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. As stipulated by the late William Steele II, the terms of his will are both unconventional and frankly extraordinary. Mr. Steele has chosen to distribute his wealth based not on familial ties, but on the execution of a specific set of conditions outlined here. He tapped the document for emphasis, his tone meticulous yet firm. Christopher's brow furrowed. "What kind of conditions?" he asked, his voice low but edged with suspicion. "Each of you," Donovan continued, "must fulfill a task that reflects your father's final wishes, his attempt perhaps to impart one last lesson before you claim your inheritance. Should any of you fail to meet the terms, your portion of the estate will be forfeited." Evelyn's gasp was audible. "He can't be serious. How could he? Even in death he's manipulating us." Billy's smirk grew into a full grin. "Oh, come on, Evelyn. It's not manipulation. It's just one final game from the old man. He loved his theatrics." Donovan raised a hand, commanding their attention once more. "If I may proceed. Christopher, as the eldest son who remained closest to your father's original legacy of hard work and humility, your task involves overseeing the rehabilitation of a struggling community center in your hometown. This will require hands-on management for 6 months, during which you will be expected to rebuild its operations and foster a thriving environment." Christopher's lips tightened, his fists clenched. "That's a lot to unpack." "Indeed," Donovan replied, turning to Evelyn. "Evelyn, as the one who has sought to chart her own path, your father's condition is an exploration of perspective. You are to live among the community you left behind for no less than 6 months, taking on a profession of service to truly understand their struggles." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, words failing her as disbelief painted her face. "And lastly," Donovan said, his gaze settling on Billy, "your challenge is one of humility and authenticity. You are to assume a role of labor, stripped of your title and privileges, within the same community. This role will remain anonymous, and any attempt to leverage your influence will be considered a breach of the conditions." Billy sat forward, the grin vanishing from his face. "You can't be serious." Donovan's gaze was steady. "I assure you, the terms are ironclad. Your father's intentions were clear." A charged silence filled the room. Christopher broke it, his voice resolute. "So this is how he wants us to earn our inheritance, by playing these twisted games?" "It's more than that," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "He's asking us to face who we are, who we've become. Maybe it's his way of making us better." Billy let out a sharp laugh, the sound bitter. "Oh, come off it, Evelyn. He's controlling us from the grave." Donovan ignored the growing tension, folding the document with precision. "You each have 1 month to prepare before embarking on your tasks. Your progress will be monitored, and should you complete the term successfully, the inheritance will be distributed accordingly. As they filed out of the office, each sibling carried a different weight. Christopher's thoughts churned with the logistics of his task. How would he rebuild a community center with limited resources? Evelyn's heart raced at the prospect of returning to a town she had spent years escaping, the ghosts of her past threatening to overwhelm her. And Billy, though outwardly composed, seethed inwardly at the prospect of working beneath others, his pride already bristling at the thought. For now the will had spoken, and the challenge had only just begun. The golden hue of the setting sun cast a warm glow over the bustling streets of New Orleans as Christopher, Evelyn, and Billy arrived in the city they had rarely visited as adults. The faint sound of a jazz band playing in the distance drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of freshly fried beignets and the salty tang of the nearby Mississippi River. For a city that seemed so alive, it was ironic how out of place the three of them felt in its embrace. Christopher drove the old pickup truck their father had insisted on keeping even in his later years. The truck's engine rumbled loudly as they made their way down the narrow streets of the lower Ninth Ward, the area where they were expected to fulfill their father's wishes. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, her gaze flitting nervously between the passing buildings, while Billy sat in the back seat, fidgeting with his phone, his disinterest palpable. "So," Evelyn said, breaking the silence, "this is it. Back to where it all began." Christopher glanced at her briefly, his hands gripping the worn steering wheel. "Not exactly where it began, but close enough. Dad grew up around here before he, made his name." "Funny how he wants us back here now," Billy interjected, his voice laced with sarcasm. "I mean, couldn't he have just donated some money and called it a day? This whole life lesson thing feels like overkill." "Maybe it's exactly what we need," Evelyn said quietly, her voice tinged with both trepidation and hope. Billy let out a snort but said nothing further. The tension between them simmered, unspoken but undeniable. The truck came to a halt outside a modest, weathered building that served as the community center Christopher had been tasked with restoring. The sign above the door was faded, the paint peeling, and the windows bore the scars of years of neglect. A group of children played basketball on a cracked court nearby, their laughter a stark contrast to the desolation surrounding them. Christopher stepped out of the truck, taking in the sight with a deep breath. "This is it," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Evelyn hesitated before following him, her heels clicking against the pavement. "It's more run down than I expected." "It's a dump," Billy added bluntly, slamming the truck door shut. "Good luck with that, Chris." Christopher shot him a glare but held his tongue. There was no point in arguing, not yet anyway. As they stood there, the door to the community center creaked open, and a petite woman with curly hair streaked with gray emerged. Her eyes were sharp, and her demeanor was commanding despite her small stature. She approached them with a mix of curiosity and guardedness. "You must be the Steele kids," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years spent in this community. "Name's Loretta Williams. I run things around here, or at least I try to." Christopher stepped forward and extended his hand. "I'm Christopher. These are my siblings, Evelyn and Billy." Loretta's handshake was firm. She eyed Evelyn and Billy briefly before returning her attention to Christopher. "Your daddy mentioned you might show up. Never said why, though." "It's complicated," Evelyn said, offering a weak smile. "Isn't it always?" Loretta replied, her tone dry. She gestured toward the building. "Come on inside, let's talk." The interior of the community center was as worn as its exterior. The walls were lined with faded posters and outdated flyers, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. A group of teenagers sat in a corner hunched over a tattered chessboard, while a volunteer sorted canned goods in the makeshift pantry. "This place has been hanging on by a thread for years," Loretta said as she led them to her office. "We do what we can, but it's hard when resources are scarce and people lose hope." Christopher nodded, his expression somber. "That's why I'm here, to help turn things around." Loretta raised an eyebrow. "That's so? Well, I hope you mean it, because it's going to take more than good intentions to make a difference here." As they talked, Evelyn wandered into the main hall, her eyes taking in the peeling paint and the faded memories of a once thriving community. She felt a pang of guilt, a whisper of the life she had left behind to chase her dreams. Could she really reconnect with this place, with these people? Meanwhile, Billy lingered near the door, his arms crossed and his expression closed off. He had no intention of blending in or playing along. To him, this was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, a test of endurance he would pass by sheer willpower and cunning. That evening, the three siblings found themselves at a small diner down the street, the kind of place their father would have loved. The scent of gumbo and fried catfish filled the air as they sat in a booth, the conversation strained. "This is going to be a disaster," Billy said, stirring his iced tea with a straw. "Christopher playing handyman, Evelyn pretending to care, and me, well, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do yet." "Maybe that's the point," Evelyn shot back. "Maybe you're supposed to figure it out." Billy rolled his eyes. "Spare me the lecture." Christopher slammed his hand on the table, silencing them both. "Enough. Look, we don't have to like it, but we're here. So let's just try, for Dad's sake." The weight of his words settled over them, a reminder of the man whose shadow loomed large even in death. As they left the diner and stepped into the cool night air, a soft jazz melody floated through the streets, carrying with it a sense of both melancholy and possibility. The Steele siblings stood on the precipice of change, each grappling with the challenges ahead and the scars of their shared past. This was only the beginning. Michael Harrington adjusted his collar as he stepped into the echoing hall of the Willowbrook Community Center. The air inside felt heavy, alive with struggles, hope, and whispers of lives barely holding together. Sunlight streamed through cracked windows, dust motes shimmering like forgotten dreams. He paused for a moment, gripping the mop handle in his hand tighter than he needed to. For years, Michael had lived in polished skyscrapers, commanding boardrooms where a single decision could shift fortunes. Now, dressed in a faded gray janitor's uniform, he walked the same halls his father once spoke of, halls that he, in his indifference, had allowed to crumble. "I need to do this," he reminded himself quietly, his voice lost in the empty room. "I owe them that much." The loud thud of a basketball crashing into his bucket broke his reverie, sending soapy water spilling across the floor. "Watch out, janitor man!" Michael looked up, startled. A boy with wild curly hair and mismatched sneakers skidded to a stop, his face alight with mischief. "Sorry," the boy called, his grin sheepish before he darted back toward his friends on the makeshift court. Michael couldn't help but smile faintly. Kids had a way of making everything feel lighter, even in places weighed down by so much. As Michael turned to clean the mess, a sharp voice cut through the chatter. "Marcus, you're going to crack that window if you're not careful." The room shifted as a woman walked in, her presence undeniable. Vanessa Parker carried herself with an effortless authority, like a lighthouse amidst a storm. The children's laughter quieted as she strode across the room in an olive green blouse and sensible slacks, her deep brown eyes scanning everything. The peeling paint, the broken hoops, and the tired faces, with a mixture of exasperation and care. Michael froze mid-mop. For reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself watching her, captivated. Her fire was undeniable, and her voice carried a conviction he hadn't heard in years. "All right, everyone," Vanessa clapped her hands, pulling Michael back to reality. "Meeting starts in 5 minutes. Grab your seats and quiet down." Michael hesitated as the basketball game screeched to a halt and folding chairs scraped against the scuffed floors. He knew he should keep his head down, blending in was key. But something about her words made him linger. He moved to a corner, his mop idly in hand, ears sharp to catch every word. "The Willowbrook Center is falling apart," Vanessa began, her voice steady, clear. "We all see it. But this place isn't just walls and broken floors. It's where our kids come to feel safe, where families find support when there's nowhere else to go. It's hope when everything else seems hopeless." Michael's throat tightened. Hope. The word felt like a stone dropping in his chest. Vanessa's voice rose with conviction. "But we can't wait for help to fall into our laps. We have to come together, fight for this place. Because if we don't, who will?" A small ripple of applause followed her words, but Michael's thoughts churned elsewhere. He'd spent years profiting off places like this, communities he never visited but bought and sold with numbers on a spreadsheet. And now, standing here, surrounded by those who still believed in its worth, he felt like a fraud. "What am I even doing here?" he muttered under his breath. "Excuse me." Michael flinched. Vanessa stood in front of him, brow raised in curiosity. Nothing," he stammered, gripping the mop. "Just listening." Vanessa's gaze lingered on him, sharp and assessing. Michael swallowed hard, praying she didn't see through him. "Well, keep at it," she said finally, her voice softening. "And thank you for keeping this place clean. We're all doing our part, no matter how small." "Sure," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. He watched as she turned and rejoined the group, her passion igniting the room again. Michael clenched the mop tighter, guilt curling in his gut. "They think I'm just a janitor. If they knew who I really was, a man who once signed contracts that crushed places like this, they'd never look at me the same." But he couldn't leave. Not yet. As the meeting ended, Michael retreated to the far end of the gym, attempting to gather his thoughts. He spotted a flyer pinned haphazardly to the bulletin board. The words, though faded, pierced through him. "We rise together. Willowbrook Community Center needs you." Michael's jaw tightened. He remembered his father's words years ago, ones he had long tried to forget. Money means nothing if you can't look a man in the eye and say you've helped him. This was his chance, a chance to undo some of the damage, a chance to atone, not with money but with sweat and silence. From across the gym, Vanessa caught his eye again, her face softening ever so slightly as she spoke to one of the children. Michael turned away, feeling like an imposter in his own skin. But maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. As he pushed the mop bucket toward the supply closet, a small voice called out to him again. "Hey, janitor man!" The curly-haired boy from earlier grinned up at him, holding out a crumpled flyer. "Are you gonna help save the center too?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. Slowly, he reached out and took the flyer, the boy's hopeful smile burning into his memory. "Yeah," Michael said quietly, almost to himself. "Yeah, kid, I'm gonna try." The Louisiana sun hung high over the city, casting long shadows across the streets of the lower Ninth Ward. The Steele siblings had settled into their temporary roles, but beneath the surface of their progress, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Christopher stood outside the community center, clipboard in hand, directing a team of local volunteers. Sweat dampened his shirt as he marked off completed tasks. "Okay, we need to clear out the storage room next," he said, gesturing toward the back of the building. "There's a pile of broken equipment that needs sorting. Let's move it to the curb for pickup." A young man named Malik, one of the center's regulars, nodded and rallied the others. "Got it, Mr. Steele." Christopher appreciated Malik's eagerness, but his focus was split. His mind churned with worries about funding, timelines, and the ever-present question of whether their efforts would even make a dent in the community's struggles. He ran a hand through his hair, glancing toward the street where Evelyn had parked her rental car. Evelyn was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. She wore a crisp blazer despite the sweltering heat, and her polished appearance starkly contrasted with the neighborhood's worn charm. "No, I told you," she snapped into the phone. "The gala has to be perfect. I don't care if the caterer is short-staffed. Find a solution." Her frustration was evident as she ended the call and leaned against the car, exhaling sharply. She glanced at the community center and shook her head. This world felt foreign to her, a stark reminder of the life she had left behind. Meanwhile, Billy lingered inside the community center, sitting at a makeshift desk in one corner. He was supposed to be organizing the files Loretta had given him, but his attention was elsewhere. His phone buzzed with notifications, a steady stream of messages from his friends back in New York. The temptation to leave this all behind tugged at him like a persistent itch. Loretta entered the room, her sharp eyes immediately landing on Billy. "You know, those files won't organize themselves," she said, her tone laced with dry humor. Billy glanced up, startled. "I'm getting to it," he mumbled, shoving his phone into his pocket. Loretta crossed her arms, unimpressed. "You've got potential, kid, but potential doesn't mean much without effort." Billy flushed, her words striking a nerve. He didn't respond, instead turning his attention to the pile of folders in front of him. Loretta lingered for a moment before nodding and leaving him to his task. Outside, Evelyn finally approached Christopher, who was now inspecting the peeling paint on the building's exterior. "We need to talk," she said, her tone clipped. Christopher sighed, bracing himself. "What is it now?" "This project," Evelyn said, gesturing broadly at the center. "It's too much. We don't have the resources or the time to fix everything. We need to scale back. Focus on one or two key areas." Christopher's jaw tightened. "We can't just pick and choose, Evelyn. This place needs everything. New facilities, programs, staff. Scaling back isn't an option." Evelyn frowned. "It's not realistic, Chris. You're setting yourself up for failure." "I'd rather fail trying than succeed doing nothing," Christopher shot back, his voice rising. Their argument drew the attention of a few volunteers who quickly pretended to be busy. Evelyn threw up her hands in exasperation. "Fine, do it your way, but don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Christopher to stew in his frustration. He glanced at the volunteers and forced a smile, masking the turmoil within. That evening, the siblings gathered at the small rental house they were sharing during their stay. The tension was palpable as they sat around the dining table, eating a dinner of takeout fried chicken and coleslaw. No one spoke for several minutes, the silence broken only by the clink of utensils against plates. Finally, Billy broke the silence. "So, are we going to talk about the fact that this whole thing is a train wreck waiting to happen?" Christopher glared at him. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Billy." Billy shrugged. "I'm just saying what we're all thinking. This place is falling apart, and we're not exactly a dream team." Evelyn set down her fork with a sharp clatter. "Maybe if you actually contributed something instead of sitting on your phone all day, we'd make more progress." Billy bristled. "Oh, please. Like you're doing any better. You're more interested in your fancy galas than actually helping people." The argument escalated, voices overlapping as they hurled accusations and frustrations at each other. Christopher slammed his hand on the table, silencing them both. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the small room. "I get it. None of us want to be here. But we are here, and we owe it to Dad to see this through. So either help or get out of the way." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Evelyn and Billy exchanged uneasy glances, neither willing to be the first to apologize. As the night wore on, Christopher found himself sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. The warm breeze carried the faint hum of cicadas and the distant sound of music from a nearby house. He felt the burden of their father's expectations pressing heavily on his shoulders. Loretta's voice interrupted his thoughts. She stood at the foot of the porch steps, her expression softer than usual. "Tough day, huh?" Christopher nodded, his voice weary. "You could say that." Loretta climbed the steps and sat beside him, her presence both comforting and grounding. "You're doing good work, Chris. Don't let the noise get to you." He looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, if we're actually making a difference." Loretta smiled faintly. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It's messy, it's hard, and it's thankless, but it's worth it." Her words lingered with him as he stared out into the night, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Despite the cracks in their facade, Christopher resolved to push forward, even if it meant rebuilding not just the community center, but the fragile bond between himself and his siblings. The early morning light streamed through the window, painting the peeling walls of the rental house in hues of gold and amber. Christopher sat at the dining table, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. His eyes were fixed on a folder filled with old papers, his expression contemplative. It was a collection of documents their father had left behind, blueprints, handwritten notes, and photographs, all tied to the community center's history. Evelyn walked into the room still dressed in her silk pajamas and paused when she saw him. "You're up early?" she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "What's that?" Christopher didn't look up. "Dad's notes. I couldn't sleep." She hesitated before joining him at the table, her curiosity piqued. Christopher handed her a black and white photograph of their father standing in front of the community center, a young Loretta by his side. They were smiling, pride evident in their expressions. Evelyn traced the edges of the photograph with her fingertips. "I'd forgotten how much this place meant to him." Christopher nodded. It wasn't just a building to him. It was a symbol of hope. He used to tell me stories about how the community came together to build it brick by brick. As they sifted through the papers, Evelyn found a faded envelope tucked among the documents. It was addressed to their father, with a postmark from 1985. She opened it carefully, revealing a handwritten letter. "Chris, look at this," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. She began to read aloud. "Dear Nathaniel, thank you for believing in us when no one else would. Your support has given us the courage to dream bigger. We promise to honor your faith in us by working hard to build a better future for our children. This center is just the beginning." The letter was signed by a group of community members, their names scrawled in different inks and handwriting styles. Christopher leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. He wasn't just a benefactor, he was a lifeline for these people. Evelyn's gaze softened as she folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. He believed in second chances. Later that day, the Steele siblings and Loretta convened at the community center. Loretta had arranged for an old friend, Marcus Hayes, to share stories about the center's history. Marcus, a retired teacher with a booming voice and a warm smile, had been one of the first people to benefit from Nathaniel Steele's generosity. Marcus greeted them with a firm handshake and an infectious laugh. Nathaniel Steele. Now there was a man with vision, he said, settling into a chair in the small meeting room. "What was he like?" Billy asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Marcus chuckled. "Your dad was a force of nature. He had this way of making everyone feel seen, like they mattered. When the city wanted to demolish the old school building that stood here, he rallied the community to turn it into this center instead. He didn't just write checks, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work." Christopher listened intently, his admiration for their father growing with each word. "What happened after the center was built?" Marcus's expression turned somber. "The center thrived for years, but when funding dried up and the city turned its back on this neighborhood, things fell apart. It broke your dad's heart. He kept fighting, though, even when the odds were against him." Loretta interjected, her voice firm. "That's why we're here now, to finish what he started." As the day wore on, the siblings found themselves drawn to different parts of the center. Evelyn wandered into a dusty storage room and discovered a box of old trophies and plaques. One plaque caught her eye. "For outstanding community service, Nathaniel Steele." She held it in her hands, her chest tightening with a mix of pride and sorrow. Meanwhile, Christopher stood in the main hall, staring at the faded mural on the wall. It depicted scenes of unity and progress, children playing, families working together, and a sun rising over a field of flowers. The mural had been one of their father's favorite features of the center, a visual representation of his dreams for the community. Billy, on the other hand, found himself outside, watching a group of kids play basketball on the cracked court. Their laughter and shouts reminded him of his own childhood, and he couldn't help but smile. He approached the group hesitantly, unsure of how to connect. One of the kids, a wiry boy with a determined expression, called out to him. "Hey, mister, wanna play?" Billy hesitated, then nodded. Sure, why not? The game was chaotic but fun, and for a brief moment Billy felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in a long time. When the game ended, the boy high-fived him and grinned. "You're not bad for an old guy." Billy laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Thanks, I think." That evening, the siblings reconvened at the rental house. Over dinner, they shared their experiences from the day, their bond strengthening as they opened up to each other. "I found this," Evelyn said, placing the plaque on the table. "It reminded me of how much he gave to this place." Christopher nodded. "And how much we still have to do." Billy surprised them all by speaking up. "I played basketball with some of the kids today. They're good, really good. Maybe we could fix up the court and start a league or something. Give them a reason to come here." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "That's actually a great idea." Loretta, who had joined them for dinner, smiled proudly. "Now you're thinking like your dad." As the night wore on, they pored over their father's notes, brainstorming ways to breathe new life into the center. The conversation was filled with laughter, arguments, and moments of reflection, but for the first time, they felt like they were truly working as a team. Outside, the night was quiet, But inside the house, the Steele siblings were beginning to find their rhythm, inspired by their father's legacy and determined to honor it. The warm, sunny morning buzzed with anticipation. The Steele siblings stood at the heart of the community center's yard, surrounded by colorful booths, tables laden with baked goods, and the sound of laughter. The festival, a brainchild of Evelyn and Loretta, was meant to rekindle community spirit and raise funds for much-needed repairs. A stage had been set up for local performances, and the aroma of grilled food wafted through the air. Christopher adjusted the microphone on the stage, scanning the crowd with a mixture of pride and trepidation. Evelyn stood nearby, dressed in a vibrant sundress, greeting attendees with her practiced charm. Billy, to everyone's surprise, had taken charge of the basketball court, organizing impromptu games for the neighborhood kids. Loretta bustled around, ensuring everything ran smoothly. "It's a good turnout," Christopher murmured to Evelyn as she joined him. "Better than I expected," she smiled faintly. "People remember what this place meant to them. They just needed a reason to come back." The day unfolded smoothly at first. Children ran between booths, their faces painted with butterflies and superheroes. Families lingered over barbecue plates, and an elderly choir filled the air with soulful melodies. For a moment, it seemed like the Steele siblings' efforts were paying off. By early afternoon, the festival was in full swing. Christopher was midway through a heartfelt speech about the importance of community when a commotion erupted near the food stalls. A loud crash echoed, silencing the crowd. "What was that?" Evelyn asked, her eyes darting toward the noise. Christopher handed her the microphone and rushed toward the source of the disturbance. A vendor's booth had collapsed, spilling hot oil and flaming coals onto the grass. People scrambled to help, but the fire spread quickly, igniting nearby decorations. "Someone call the fire department," Loretta shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Billy appeared with a bucket of water, dousing the flames with the help of a few quick-thinking attendees. The fire was extinguished before it could cause serious damage, but the mood of the festival had shifted. Tension replaced laughter, and murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd. As if the fire wasn't enough, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. A strong gust of wind sent paper plates and napkins flying, and the first drops of rain splattered against the pavement. "Seriously?" Billy groaned, looking up at the sky. Evelyn tried to rally the crowd, encouraging people to move indoors, but the sudden change in weather had dampened their spirits. Many attendees began packing up, their enthusiasm replaced by resignation. Christopher clenched his fists, frustration etched across his face. "We worked so hard for this," he muttered. Loretta placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's not over yet. People see your effort, Chris. That counts for something." Inside the community center, the siblings regrouped with Loretta in the main hall. Rain pounded against the windows, and the once vibrant festival now felt like a distant memory. Evelyn paced the room, her heels clicking against the worn floor. "This was supposed to be our big moment," she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. "A chance to show everyone we could make this place matter again." Billy leaned against a wall, arms crossed. "Stuff happens. We roll with it." Christopher rubbed his temples, his exhaustion evident. "We need a plan. Something to salvage what's left of today." Before they could brainstorm, a group of community members entered the hall, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. Among them was Marcus Hayes, who spoke up. "We're not giving up that easily," he said. "This place has weathered worse than a little rain and a small fire. What do you need us to do?" His words sparked a renewed sense of purpose. The siblings exchanged glances, their resolve strengthening. They quickly divided tasks. Loretta organized a cleanup crew, Evelyn reached out to vendors to reassure them, and Christopher prepared a makeshift stage for indoor performances. The rain continued to pour, but inside the community center, the atmosphere began to shift. Children laughed as volunteers handed out balloons and candy. A local musician strummed his guitar, his melodies filling the hall with warmth. The festival might not have gone as planned, but the spirit of the event remained alive. Billy returned from the basketball court, drenched but grinning. "The kids are still playing out there. They don't care about the rain." Evelyn smirked. "Maybe we should all take a page from their book." As the evening wore on, the community came together in ways the Steele siblings hadn't anticipated. Families stayed to help clean up, and vendors donated leftover food to those in need. Despite the setbacks, a sense of unity emerged, a reminder of what the center had once been and could become again. By the time the rain stopped, the siblings were exhausted but hopeful. Standing in the main hall, they watched as attendees trickled out, offering words of encouragement and promises to return. Christopher turned to Evelyn and Billy. "Today wasn't perfect, but it showed us something important." Evelyn nodded, her earlier frustration replaced by determination. "That this place still matters, to them and to us." Billy grinned. "Guess we're not done yet." Loretta joined them, her expression proud. "Your father would have been proud of you today. This is just the beginning." As they locked up the center for the night, the siblings couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The festival might not have gone as planned, but it had planted a seed of hope, one they were determined to nurture. The air inside the Steele family home was thick with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. After the festival's challenges, the siblings had agreed to take the following day off to reflect and regroup. Yet the notion of rest was elusive. Evelyn sat on the living room couch, staring at the rain-soaked flyers they had painstakingly prepared. Christopher paced by the window, while Billy leaned against the kitchen counter, absently tossing a basketball between his hands. "We came so close," Evelyn muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it still feels like we missed something." Christopher stopped mid-step. "We didn't miss anything, Evelyn. We were sabotaged." Both Evelyn and Billy turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Billy asked, his tone skeptical. Christopher reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a charred piece of fabric. He held it up, revealing the remnants of a soaked and burned cloth marked with faint streaks of a flammable chemical. "I found this near the food stalls after the fire." Evelyn's face hardened. "You think someone started the fire on purpose?" Christopher nodded. "It's too much of a coincidence. The way the flames spread so fast, the timing, it wasn't an accident." The revelation hung in the air, casting a shadow over their recent accomplishments. Evelyn's mind raced, replaying the day's events. Could it be one of the vendors, a disgruntled attendee, or worse, someone trying to sabotage their efforts to revive the community center? Billy broke the silence. "If someone did this, we can't let them get away with it. But we need proof, solid proof." Evelyn stood abruptly, her determination reignited. "Then we find it. If someone's trying to stop us, we need to know who and why." The following morning, the siblings returned to the community center. The place still bore the scars of the previous day, the singed grass near the food stalls, the lingering smell of smoke, and the faint dampness from the rain. Loretta was already there, supervising volunteers who were cleaning up the aftermath. When Christopher shared his discovery with Loretta, her brow furrowed in concern. "I thought something felt off yesterday," she admitted. "We've had trouble before. People who didn't want this place to succeed, but this is different." Evelyn folded her arms. "Do you know anyone who might have a reason to sabotage us?" Loretta hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "There's a developer, Franklin Bowers. He's been trying to buy up properties in this neighborhood for years, including this center. He's offered money, threatened lawsuits, even spread rumors to discredit us." Billy scowled. "And you think he'd go this far?" "I wouldn't put it past him," Loretta said grimly. "But we can't accuse him without evidence." The siblings decided to investigate discreetly. Christopher took on the task of researching Franklin Bowers, digging through public records and news articles for any incriminating information. Evelyn focused on speaking with the vendors and attendees from the festival, subtly probing for anything unusual they might have noticed. Billy, ever resourceful, used his connections in the community to gather intel. Their efforts yielded a few promising leads. Several vendors recalled seeing a man in a dark suit near the food stalls shortly before the fire, acting suspiciously. A volunteer mentioned overhearing a heated argument between two men behind the stage, and Christopher uncovered a series of legal complaints filed by Franklin Bowers against other community projects. As evening fell, the siblings reconvened at the community center. Their findings painted a troubling picture, but they still lacked definitive proof. Frustration began to set in, but Evelyn refused to give up. "We're close," she insisted. "There's something we're missing." Loretta, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "You need to talk to Marcus Hayes. He's been fighting Bowers for years, trying to keep his properties out of his hands. If anyone knows what's really going on, it's him." That night, the siblings paid a visit to Marcus Hayes. The elderly man welcomed them into his modest home, his weathered face etched with the lines of a life spent fighting for justice. "I've been expecting you," Marcus said, his tone somber. "Word travels fast in this neighborhood." Christopher explained their suspicions, laying out the evidence they had gathered. Marcus listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You're not wrong," he said when they finished. "Bowers has been trying to choke this community for years. The fire at your festival? It's his style. Disrupt, intimidate, and make people lose faith." Evelyn leaned forward. "Do you have proof? Anything we can use to stop him?" Marcus hesitated, then rose from his chair. He retrieved a folder from a nearby cabinet and placed it on the table. "This is everything I've collected over the years. Documents, witness statements, even recordings. It might not be enough to bring him down, but it's a start." As they left Marcus's home, the siblings felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had a clear target and the beginnings of a plan. But they also knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. "This isn't just about the community center anymore," Evelyn said, her voice resolute. "It's about standing up for everything this place represents." Christopher nodded. "Then we fight. Together." Billy smirked. "You know me. I'm always up for a good fight." The siblings shared a determined look as they walked into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Daniel stood at the window of the small, dimly lit room that served as his makeshift office in the community center. Outside, the familiar hustle and bustle of New Orleans continued, a blend of hope and hardship that had become the backdrop to his life these past weeks. The sounds of children laughing as they played in the yard mixed with the hum of passing cars and street vendors calling out their wares. He let out a slow breath, hands in his pockets. Everything had changed since Serena discovered his secret. Serena's cold demeanor toward him stung, but it was the disappointment in her eyes that haunted him. Daniel had grown to respect her deeply, not just for her strength, but for her unwavering ability to inspire hope. He wanted to make it right, not just for her, but for himself. "Actions speak louder than words," his mother's voice echoed in his head, a distant memory that felt closer than ever. The following morning, Daniel was up before dawn. He didn't just clean the center this time, he transformed it. He painted over graffiti that had scarred the walls, fixed broken furniture, and even polished the floors until they shone. By the time Serena arrived, the center looked reborn. She stood frozen in the doorway, Jaden at her side, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Serena finally asked, her voice sharp but laced with curiosity. Daniel turned to her, sweat on his brow, his breathing steady. "Because I'm not the man you think I am. Not anymore." Jaden, curious and cautious, stepped closer. "Looks like you're earning your keep, janitor," he quipped. But there was no malice in his tone, just the beginnings of reluctant respect. Serena said nothing more. She simply turned and walked away, but Daniel noticed the slight softening in her posture. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Daniel knew that fixing the community center wasn't enough. It needed resources, money, supplies, and support. For the first time, he decided to use the very connections he had kept hidden. That evening, he sat in the small office, dialing numbers he hadn't used in years. "Yes, this is Daniel Gray. No, I'm not calling for business. I need a favor." By the time he hung up, he had secured commitments for food donations, educational supplies, and even a modest sponsorship from a local business. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As word of the improvements spread, volunteers began returning to the center. Mrs. Monroe smiled at him knowingly as she stacked boxes of books. "Takes a strong man to admit he's got more to learn, Daniel. Keep at it." Later that week, Daniel was walking to his car when he heard muffled voices in a nearby alley. He turned the corner and froze. Marcus and Tommy were there, roughing up a young man from the center who Daniel recognized as one of Serena's students. "Leave him alone," Daniel said firmly, stepping forward. Marcus smirked, releasing the boy, who scrambled to his feet and ran. "Well, if it isn't the janitor," Marcus sneered. "This ain't your fight, pretty boy. Walk away." Daniel didn't flinch. He stepped closer. "I know what you're doing, shaking down people for money, vandalizing property. And if you touch this community again, I'll make sure every cop in New Orleans knows who you are." Marcus's expression hardened, his hands curling into fists. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I think I do," Daniel said calmly. "But do you know who I am?" For a moment, Marcus seemed unsure. There was something in Daniel's confidence that unsettled him. Finally, Marcus scoffed and pushed past Daniel, disappearing into the night. Serena didn't learn about Daniel's confrontation with Marcus until the following day, when the student tearfully recounted what had happened. She listened quietly, then approached Daniel as he mopped the floors. "Why didn't you tell me what happened?" she asked softly. Daniel paused, the mop still in his hands. "Because it wasn't about me. It was about protecting this place, protecting you." Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment. "Maybe I was wrong about you," she admitted. "It doesn't matter what you think of me," Daniel replied, meeting her eyes. "What matters is keeping this place alive." That night, Serena finally smiled at Daniel for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a grand gesture, but to Daniel it was everything. The center began to thrive once more. Volunteers poured in, local businesses stepped up, and the children had hope in their eyes again. Jaden approached Daniel one afternoon holding a stack of law books. "You know," Jaden said cautiously, "you're not as bad as I thought. You're still rich and clueless, but you're trying." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "I'll take that as a compliment." Jaden smiled faintly. "I want to help. If Marcus and Tommy come back, I want to make sure they can't hurt anyone here again." Daniel saw the fire in Jaden's eyes, the same fire he had seen in Serena. "You'll make a great lawyer someday," Daniel said quietly. "Your mom must be proud." Jaden hesitated. "She is. She just doesn't say it much." "You don't need her to say it. You can see it." That evening, Marcus and Tommy showed up at the community center, trying to intimidate the staff and volunteers. Daniel stood at the door, arms crossed, blocking their way. "This place doesn't belong to you," Daniel said firmly. Tommy sneered. "You think you can stop us?" "I don't think. I know," Daniel replied. "And if you don't leave, you're going to have bigger problems than me." For a moment, tension crackled in the air. But as Serena and the other volunteers appeared behind Daniel, standing together as a united front, Marcus and Tommy hesitated. With a muttered curse, they turned and walked away. Daniel turned back to see Serena watching him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Daniel replied. "Because I believe in what you're doing here, and I'm not leaving until we win." Rain cascaded down the cracked pavement as Evelyn stepped out of the car. The streetlights flickered in the storm, casting distorted shadows across the deserted lot outside Franklin Bauer's office building. Tonight was not about subtlety, it was about confrontation. Christopher emerged behind her, umbrella in hand, his face a mask of steely resolve. Billy trailed slightly, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, exuding a defiant energy that Evelyn knew was fueled by both anger and a sense of justice. This was their moment to change the narrative, to turn the tide that had worked against their family and community for far too long. "Are you ready for this?" Christopher asked, his voice cutting through the storm. Evelyn nodded, gripping the folder of evidence they had painstakingly compiled. "This is our only chance. We go in, we get answers, and we make sure he knows we won't back down." The siblings entered the lobby, their wet footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The receptionist glanced up, startled by their sudden arrival. "We're here to see Franklin Bowers," Evelyn declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. The woman hesitated. "Mr. Bowers isn't seeing anyone at this hour." Billy leaned forward, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I think he'll want to see us. Let him know it's about the community center and the fire." The mention of the fire seemed to catch the receptionist off guard. She fumbled with the phone, murmured a quick message, and gestured toward the elevator. "Third floor. He'll see you now." As the elevator ascended, Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. This was it. The culmination of weeks of tension, of battling against unseen forces. She glanced at Christopher and Billy, drawing strength from their presence. Franklin Bauer's office was opulent, almost garish in its display of wealth. Velvet drapes framed tall windows overlooking the city, while a mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. Bowers himself sat behind it, his expression one of polite disinterest as they entered. "You've made quite the effort to see me," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I assume this is important." Evelyn stepped forward, placing the folder on his desk with a deliberate motion. "We know what you've been doing, Bowers. The sabotage, the intimidation, the fire, you've gone too far." Bowers raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Those are serious accusations. I hope you have more than baseless claims." Christopher opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and statements linking Bowers to a network of operatives who had targeted the community center. He spoke with measured precision, outlining each piece of evidence. For the first time, Bowers' confident facade cracked. His eyes flicked over the evidence, his jaw tightening. "You've done your homework," he admitted. "But do you really think this is enough to stop me?" Billy stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "It's enough to expose you. And once people see who you really are, your power won't mean a damn thing." The confrontation reached a boiling point as Evelyn delivered the final blow. "We're giving you a choice, Bowers. You can either step away quietly or we take this public. And trust me, the people you've hurt won't stay silent." Bowers stared at them, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of the rain against the windows. Then he smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. "You think you've won," he said softly, "but this game is far from over." The siblings left the office with a mix of relief and unease. They had confronted their enemy, but Bowers' parting words lingered in their minds. As they drove back through the rain-soaked streets, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger battle. Back at the community center, Loretta was waiting for them. Her face lit up with cautious hope as they recounted the night's events. "You stood your ground," she said, her voice filled with pride. "That's what matters. But you need to be prepared. Bowers won't give up easily." Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. "We'll be ready. Whatever he throws at us, we'll face it together." In the days that followed, the siblings worked tirelessly to shore up their defenses. They rallied the community, sharing their story and building a coalition of supporters. News of their confrontation with Bowers spread, igniting a wave of solidarity that strengthened their resolve. Yet the tension remained. Bowers' reach was vast, and his resources seemed endless. Evelyn knew they were fighting an uphill battle, but she also knew they couldn't afford to lose. The turning point came during a town hall meeting, where the community gathered to discuss the future of the center. Evelyn stood at the podium, her voice steady as she spoke of their vision and the challenges they faced. "This isn't just about a building," she said, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "It's about who we are as a community. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. We've come too far to back down now." The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable. Evelyn felt a surge of hope as she stepped back, knowing they were not alone in this fight. But even as they celebrated small victories, the shadow of Bowers loomed large. Late one night, Evelyn received an anonymous tip, a warning that Bowers was planning something drastic. She shared the news with Christopher and Billy, their determination unshaken. "If he wants a fight," Billy said, his voice tinged with defiance, "we'll give him one." Christopher nodded. "But we'll do it smart, no more surprises. We need to stay ahead of him." Evelyn agreed, her heart heavy but resolute. The battle was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next. The sun peeked through the heavy gray clouds, casting a faint golden hue across New Orleans. Evelyn adjusted her coat as she walked briskly toward the courthouse, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Beside her, Christopher held a thick briefcase, his face unreadable but his presence steady. Billy followed closely, his fists clenched in anticipation. Today was the day they had fought so hard to reach, the day the truth would finally be heard. The steps of the courthouse were crowded with reporters and onlookers. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust forward as questions flew in every direction. Evelyn hesitated momentarily, her heart pounding, before Christopher's hand on her shoulder anchored her. "Head up," he said quietly. "You've earned this moment." Evelyn straightened, exhaling slowly. She met the gaze of a reporter and spoke firmly. "Today isn't just about us. It's about standing up to people like Franklin Bowers and proving that no one is above accountability." Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The rows of benches were packed with community members who had come to support the cause, their faces a tapestry of determination and hope. Evelyn's eyes scanned the crowd, finding Loretta seated near the front, her expression a mixture of pride and anxiety. She gave a small nod, and Evelyn felt a wave of reassurance wash over her. Franklin Bowers entered moments later, flanked by his legal team. He looked as composed as ever, his suit immaculate, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes, a crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade. Evelyn felt a surge of resolve. This man had used his power to manipulate, destroy, and intimidate. Today, he would face the consequences. The trial began with opening statements. Christopher's voice was measured and authoritative as he laid out their case, weaving together the evidence with a narrative that painted a damning picture of Bowers' corruption. Evelyn watched him, her heart swelling with pride. He was a force to be reckoned with, his words sharp and deliberate, each one landing with precision. When Bowers' defense attorney took the floor, the tone shifted. He spun tales of plausible deniability, portraying Bowers as a misunderstood benefactor. Evelyn clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface as she listened to the calculated distortions of the truth. The first piece of evidence presented was the series of documents linking Bowers to the arson at the community center. Christopher methodically walked the jury through each piece, his voice unwavering. Evelyn noticed the jurors leaning forward, their attention fixed on the screen displaying the incriminating emails. When the photographs were presented, the charred remains of the center juxtaposed with images of Bowers' property acquisitions, gasps rippled through the courtroom. The contrast was stark, the greed unmistakable. The highlight of the day came when a surprise witness took the stand. It was one of Bowers' former associates, a man named Victor Stokes. He had come forward days earlier, offering critical testimony in exchange for leniency in his own charges. The room fell silent as he began to speak, his voice shaking but resolute. "I worked for Franklin Bowers for 10 years, Stokes admitted, his eyes darting nervously. "I was part of the team that carried out his plans, intimidating activists, sabotaging efforts to rebuild the community center, and even orchestrating the fire. I kept records because I knew this day would come." His words were like a hammer blow, each confession unraveling the carefully constructed narrative Bowers had spun. Evelyn felt her throat tighten as Stokes described the lengths to which Bowers had gone to protect his interests. During the recess, Evelyn stepped outside for a moment of air. The crowd of supporters greeted her with cheers and words of encouragement, their energy invigorating. She smiled, though her mind remained focused on the battle ahead. "You're making history today," an older woman said, gripping Evelyn's hand. "Don't let him get away with it." Evelyn nodded, her voice steady. "We won't." As the day wore on, the tension in the courtroom grew palpable. When it was finally Evelyn's turn to testify, she rose from her seat, her heart pounding. She took the stand and faced the room, meeting the eyes of the jury. She spoke of the impact Bowers' actions had on the community, the lives disrupted, the dreams shattered, and the unyielding fight to reclaim their dignity. Her voice quivered at times, but she pressed on, each word carrying the weight of truth. "I'm not here for revenge," she concluded. "I'm here for justice, for every family that lost their home, for every child who lost a safe place to learn and grow. We deserve better." The room was silent as she stepped down, the gravity of her testimony hanging in the air. By the time closing arguments began, the momentum was undeniable. Christopher's final address to the jury was a masterclass in persuasion, his voice filled with passion and conviction. "This case isn't just about Franklin Bowers," he said. "It's about the choice we make as a society, to stand up to those who abuse their power or to let them continue unchecked. Today you have the chance to say enough is enough." The jury deliberated for hours, the weight of the decision evident in their drawn faces when they finally returned. Evelyn's hands trembled as she waited, Christopher and Billy flanking her on either side. The verdict was read aloud, each word resonating like a drumbeat. Guilty on all counts. The room erupted in cheers and applause, the collective relief and triumph palpable. Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face as she turned to embrace her brothers. It was over. Justice had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters clamored for statements and supporters celebrated the victory. Evelyn stood at the top of the steps, her voice clear and unwavering as she addressed the crowd. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Today we proved that no one is above the law. Tomorrow we continue to fight for a better future." The cheers grew louder, a symphony of hope and resilience. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle had been won, but the journey toward lasting change was far from over. The courthouse steps had emptied, leaving only the cool evening breeze and a profound silence in its wake. Evelyn leaned against the railing, watching as the city lights flickered on one by one. It was a quiet moment of reflection, her mind still buzzing with the echoes of the day's monumental victory. She had fought battles before, but this one had stripped her to her core and rebuilt her stronger. Billy approached, his usual playful smirk replaced by a rare moment of solemnity. "You did good today," he said, his voice softer than she expected. Evelyn smiled faintly. "We did good," she corrected, reaching out to clasp his shoulder. "None of this would have been possible without you, and Chris. Especially Chris." Billy nodded, his eyes dropping to the pavement. "He's something else, huh? Never thought I'd see the day we'd stand together like this." "You've grown, Billy. We all have," Evelyn replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't just about us. It's about what comes next." The next morning, Evelyn woke to the scent of fresh coffee wafting through the house. She found Loretta in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured 2 steaming mugs. The elder woman's resilience was a constant source of strength, a reminder of the battles fought long before Evelyn ever dreamed of stepping into the ring. "I thought you might need this," Loretta said, sliding a mug across the table. Evelyn took a grateful sip, savoring the warmth. "You always know." "I've been around long enough to see the patterns," Loretta replied with a chuckle. "What's next for you, child? The fight may be over, but the work's just beginning." Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window where the neighborhood bustled with life. "I want to rebuild, Loretta. Not just the community center, everything. The trust, the hope, the future." Loretta reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Evelyn's. "You've got the heart for it, and now you've got the people behind you. Don't lose sight of what brought you here." Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself back at the charred remains of the community center. The air still carried faint traces of smoke, a stark reminder of the destruction Franklin Bowers had wrought. But Evelyn didn't see ruin. She saw potential. As she walked through the debris, Christopher arrived, his footsteps crunching against the broken glass. "Figured I'd find you here," he said, his voice light but his expression serious. Evelyn turned to face him. "This place used to be the heart of the community. I want it to be that again." Christopher surveyed the scene, his sharp legal mind already calculating the possibilities. "It's going to take more than just money, Ev. You'll need permits, approvals, partnerships. And you'll help me navigate it all," she interrupted, a playful challenge in her tone. Christopher chuckled. "You don't leave much room for negotiation." "Never have," Evelyn quipped. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history anchoring them. Then Christopher spoke again, his voice softer. "You inspire people, Ev. Not just the community, me too. Don't forget that." That evening, Evelyn hosted a small gathering at her home, a chance to thank those who had stood by her throughout the ordeal. The atmosphere was warm and lively, a stark contrast to the somber tones of the past weeks. Laughter echoed through the rooms as friends and neighbors shared stories and dreams of what lay ahead. Billy was in his element, regaling the crowd with exaggerated tales of their courtroom drama. "And then," he said, gesturing wildly, "Chris dropped the evidence like a bombshell. You should have seen Bauer's face, priceless." Evelyn rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress her laughter. It was moments like these that reminded her of the power of unity, of family, of love. As the night wore on, Evelyn found herself sitting on the porch steps gazing up at the stars. Loretta joined her, the two women basking in the quiet companionship. "You've built something special here," Loretta said after a long silence. Evelyn nodded. "But it's just the beginning." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Evelyn threw herself into the plans for rebuilding the community center, meeting with architects, city officials, and volunteers. Each step forward was a testament to the strength of the people who had rallied around her cause. One afternoon, while reviewing blueprints at her dining table, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman stood at her doorstep, clutching a folder nervously. "Miss Evelyn?" the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Maya. I used to go to the community center before it burned down. I heard about what you're doing and I wanted to help." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. She invited Maya in and listened as the young woman shared her ideas for youth programs, art classes, and mentorship initiatives. It was a reminder of why she had started this journey in the first place: to inspire and uplift the next generation. As the grand reopening of the community center approached, Evelyn felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The building was no longer a shell of its former self. It was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience and renewal. On the day of the event, the streets were lined with people, their faces lit with anticipation. Evelyn stood at the entrance, flanked by Christopher, Billy, and Loretta. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was brief but powerful, the crowd erupting into cheers as the doors opened. Inside, the center was alive with activity. Children explored the new play areas, teenagers signed up for workshops, and adults mingled, their conversations filled with hope and gratitude. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, her heart full. She caught Christopher's eye, and he gave her a small nod, his approval unspoken but unmistakable. Billy appeared moments later holding up a tray of refreshments. "You did it, sis. You actually did it." "No," Evelyn corrected, her voice steady. "We did it. Together." As the day turned into evening, the community center glowed with life, a testament to the power of determination and unity. Evelyn knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for now she allowed herself to revel in the moment, a moment that belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had fought for it. The morning of the first community event at the rebuilt center dawned crisp and bright. Evelyn stood at the large windows overlooking the entrance, watching as families gathered in small groups. The laughter of children echoed through the air, mingling with the rhythmic sounds of the street performers who had volunteered for the occasion. The energy was palpable, a vivid tapestry of hope and joy woven into every face. Loretta entered quietly, a clipboard in hand, her calm presence grounding Evelyn's nerves. "It's a good turnout," Loretta said, glancing over the growing crowd. Evelyn nodded, her fingers brushing against the edge of the window frame. "It feels surreal. For months, all I could see was rubble. And now look at it. Look at them." Loretta placed a comforting hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "It's because of you. You didn't just rebuild the center. You rebuilt their faith in what's possible." Inside, the main hall was a hive of activity. Volunteers guided visitors through the various workshops, and local vendors proudly showcased their crafts. At the far end of the room, Christopher stood near a table laden with informational brochures about community programs and legal aid. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes scanned the room with the precision of someone used to anticipating the next move. Evelyn approached him with a smile. "You look surprisingly at ease." Christopher chuckled. "Let's just say this is a refreshing change from courtrooms and depositions." He held up one of the brochures. "This was a great idea, by the way. Empowering people with knowledge is just as important as giving them a space to gather." Evelyn leaned against the table, her voice soft but determined. "This center is a bridge, Chris. A bridge to something better. I just hope they see it that way." "They already do," he said firmly. "You've given them a reason to believe again." Outside, Billy had taken charge of the outdoor activities, his booming voice rallying kids for a relay race. "All right, everyone. On my mark. Ready, set, go." He waved his arms dramatically as the children took off, their faces alight with determination and delight. Watching from the sidelines, Evelyn marveled at how naturally Billy connected with people. He had transformed from the mischievous brother who always skirted responsibility into a pillar of support for the community. It was a transformation she hadn't expected but was deeply grateful for. As the race ended, a little boy tugged at Billy's sleeve. "Mister, can you teach me how to run fast like you?" Billy knelt down, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Kid, it's not about running fast. It's about running smart. Stick with me and I'll show you how to be the fastest and the smartest." The boy's eyes widened with excitement, and Evelyn couldn't help but laugh at Billy's effortless charisma. The highlight of the day was a panel discussion in the newly refurbished auditorium. Local leaders, activists, and educators gathered to share their visions for the future. Evelyn sat among them, her heart pounding as the moderator introduced her as the driving force behind the center's resurrection. When it was her turn to speak, she rose slowly, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. She scanned the audience, their expectant faces a reminder of the responsibility she carried. "This center isn't just bricks and mortar," she began, her voice steady. "It's a testament to resilience, to the power of community, and to the belief that no obstacle is insurmountable when we stand together. This is our story, one of struggle, perseverance, and triumph. But it doesn't end here. This is only the beginning." Her words were met with thunderous applause, and as she sat down, she caught Loretta's approving nod from the front row. As the day turned into evening, the celebration culminated in a community dinner. Tables stretched across the courtyard, laden with dishes representing the diverse cultures within the neighborhood. People laughed, shared stories, and connected in ways that felt rare and precious. Evelyn found herself sitting between Christopher and Loretta, the three of them enjoying the warmth of the moment. Across the table, Billy animatedly recounted the day's highlights to a group of teenagers, his enthusiasm infectious. "This feels right," Evelyn said softly, her gaze sweeping over the scene. "This is what it's all about." Loretta raised her glass, a rare twinkle in her eye. "To Evelyn, for showing us what's possible." Evelyn hesitated, the weight of the compliment sinking in. Then with a smile, she raised her glass. "To us, for proving that we rise together." As the dinner wound down, Evelyn noticed a young girl lingering near the entrance. She was clutching a sketchbook, her wide eyes filled with curiosity and awe. Evelyn approached her gently, crouching to meet her gaze. "Hi there," she said warmly. "Are you having fun?" The girl nodded shyly and held out her sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of the community center, vibrant and full of life. "This is beautiful," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "What's your name?" "Amara," the girl whispered. "Well, Amara," Evelyn said, smiling, "this place is yours too, and I can't wait to see how you'll make it even more beautiful." As the final guests trickled out and the cleanup began, Evelyn stood alone in the courtyard. The stars above seemed brighter tonight, as if the universe itself celebrated the day's success. Christopher joined her, his hands in his pockets, his expression contemplative. "You did it," he said simply. Evelyn turned to him, her smile soft but resolute. "We did it." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their journey hanging between them. Then Christopher spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "This is just the start, Evelyn. There's so much more we can do." Evelyn nodded, her heart swelling with determination. "Then let's get to work." The weeks that followed the grand reopening of the community center were a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn had expected a slow build, a cautious reintroduction of the center into the lives of the community. Instead, the energy generated during the event seemed to multiply, pulling in people from every corner of New Orleans. The center buzzed with life at all hours, offering classes, support groups, and a safe space for anyone who needed it. Evelyn had barely had time to sit down since that evening under the stars, but she wasn't complaining. The exhaustion she felt now was different. It was purposeful, fulfilling. She stood in her modest office, poring over plans for a new mentorship program when Billy burst in, his face lit with excitement. "Eve, you're not gonna believe this," he exclaimed, practically bouncing on his feet. She raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at her lips. "What is it this time? Another group of kids challenging you to a basketball game?" "No, better," Billy said, sliding his phone across the desk. Check this out. On the screen was an email from a prominent non-profit organization offering a substantial grant to expand the center's programs. Evelyn's breath caught as she read the message. "This is huge," she murmured, her mind already racing with possibilities. "This could change everything." Billy grinned. "I told you, didn't I? People are noticing what we're doing here." The grant, as it turned out, was just the beginning. Over the next few months, partnerships with local businesses and organizations began to flourish. The mentorship program launched with overwhelming participation, pairing professionals from the area with young people hungry for guidance and opportunity. Loretta spearheaded a job training initiative, her no-nonsense demeanor earning respect from even the most skeptical participants. Christopher, meanwhile, had taken on the role of the center's unofficial legal advocate, offering free consultations to those navigating housing disputes, employment discrimination, and other systemic injustices. His work not only changed lives but also drew attention to the deeper issues plaguing the community. One evening, after a particularly long day, Christopher joined Evelyn on the center's rooftop terrace where she often retreated to gather her thoughts. The city stretched out before them, its lights twinkling like a sea of possibilities. "You've built something incredible here," Christopher said, his voice carrying a rare note of admiration. Evelyn shook her head. "We've built it. I couldn't have done this without you or Loretta or Billy, or the community. They're the heart of this place." Christopher smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Maybe, but every heart needs someone to keep it beating." As the center continued to grow, Evelyn began to notice subtle changes in herself. She had always been driven, but now her determination was tempered with a newfound patience and empathy. She found herself taking the time to listen more deeply, to connect with people on a level she hadn't realized was possible. One afternoon, she sat in on a creative writing class taught by a young teacher named Simone, who had once been a participant in the center's youth programs. The students, a mix of teenagers and young adults, shared their work with a raw vulnerability that brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. After the class, Simone approached her. "Thank you for this," she said simply, "for giving us a space to be heard." Evelyn placed a hand on Simone's shoulder. "Thank you for showing them the power of their voices." But the path forward wasn't without its challenges. Not everyone in the community supported the center's mission. Some saw it as a threat to the status quo, a disruption of the delicate balance that had long kept progress at bay. Evelyn received anonymous letters, their words sharp with disdain and resistance. One evening, she found herself staring at one such letter, its accusations echoing in her mind. "You don't belong here," it read. "You're not one of us." Billy found her sitting in the dim light of her office, the letter crumpled in her hand. "You can't let them get to you, Eve," he said, his voice firm. "I know," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's hard not to wonder. Am I doing enough? Am I making things worse?" Billy knelt beside her, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "You've already done more than anyone could have imagined. And those letters? They're just proof that you're shaking things up, that you're making them uncomfortable. That's how change happens." His words stayed with her, a beacon of reassurance as she navigated the challenges ahead. The turning point came during a community meeting where Evelyn presented plans for a new affordable housing project. The room was packed, tension crackling in the air as supporters and detractors voiced their opinions. Evelyn stood her ground, her voice steady as she explained the need for the project and the long-term benefits it would bring. As she finished, a man in the back of the room stood up. He was older, his face lined with years of hardship. "I was against this place when it first opened," he said, his voice rough but earnest. "Thought it was just another pipe dream, but I've seen what it's done for my neighbors, for my grandkids, and I was wrong. We need this. We need her." The room erupted into applause, the man's words breaking through the barriers of doubt and resistance. Evelyn felt a surge of emotion, her gratitude spilling over as she thanked him. Months later, the center stood as a shining example of what could be achieved when a community came together. Its impact rippled outward, inspiring similar efforts in neighboring cities. Evelyn's journey was far from over, but she felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that she had helped light the way. As she walked through the center one evening, she stopped to watch a group of children painting a mural on one of the walls. The mural depicted a phoenix rising from the ashes, its vibrant colors a testament to resilience and hope. Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This was her legacy, not just a building but a movement, a brighter future for everyone it touched. As we reach the end of this story, it's clear that Evelyn's journey wasn't just about transforming a building. It was about transforming lives. Her resilience, compassion, and determination remind us of the power of community and the strength found in unity. Through her actions, Evelyn showed us that change starts with a single step and that one person's courage can ignite an entire movement. But what about you? Have you ever been inspired to create change in your community or stand up for what's right, even when the odds were against you? What would you do if faced with the challenges Evelyn encountered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about the power of community, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel to explore more stories like this, stories of resilience, justice, and the human spirit. Together, let's continue to share and celebrate the tales that bring us closer. See you in the next one.